Hey folks, it's Ashley Ahearn. I'm so sorry I was out herding cows, and I'll be on camera in about 10 minutes if you can give me that time, but I'll just be on mute here until then.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, perfect. I think we'll go ahead and get started then, now that Ashley's joined us. My name's Peter. I work here at Amplify Arts, and it's really great to have everybody here for tonight's Alternate Currents panel discussion, Co-Becoming on Art, Animals, and Place, with our three really incredible panelists, Ashley Ahearn, who is out herding cattle as we speak, Sarah Rowe, and Lee Running. Lee is also going to be kind of guiding the conversation, and they'll introduce themselves to you in just a minute here. But before that, for anybody who is joining us for the first time or anyone who's new to Amplify, we're a nonprofit arts organization dedicated to supporting artist-driven change, and Alternate Currents is one program that helps us do that by contextualizing big national and international issues in the arts with responses from people working on the ground. So tonight's discussion is just one in a year-long investigation around the idea of place and the environmental, economic, and social dimensions that shape our understanding of what it means to be in, of, or from a place. Our panelists are going to be in conversation with each other for about 40 or 45 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions. But the Q&A and chat functions are going to be active throughout the discussion, so please feel free to share your thoughts there at any time. I'll also mention really quickly that a video and transcript of tonight's discussion with links to additional articles and more resources will be posted to the Alternate Currents blog in just a couple of weeks. So you'll be able to find this discussion and a lot of other great conversations like it under the conversation tab on our homepage at amplifyarts.org. So with that, thank you all again for being here. We really appreciate your participation and your willingness to engage in critical discussion with us. Thank you to the Sherwood Foundation, whose support makes Alternate Currents programming possible. And Lee, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm so excited about this panel. I'm so excited that it's an excuse for me to meet Sarah, whose work I've loved, and we live in the same town, and it's a wonderful thing to meet other artists who live in the same place that you do. I am connected to Amplify Arts through a generator. I'm part of a generator cohort this year that is working on place, and my own work as a sculptor is based at sort of the collision between the animal world and the human world. I'm working this year, and really for the last 5 years, my project has been working with roadkill deer. I work with these animals that I find beside the road in the ditch that's beside the road, a space that's called the Verge. And I collect deer from this space and take care of their bones and clean them and polish them. And then anything that's missing from the road accident, I repair with kiln cast glass. And then I re-articulate the skeletons, often standing on 2 legs so that they feel very human, and so that we approach them face to face and body to body in the gallery. And I'm interested in what this work does to build empathy between the human and the animal world, and also to sort of draw attention to an act that happens hundreds of times a day in the US, and something that we are all taught to just drive by. I'm really curious about what that says about our relationship to wildness in this country, and what we're doing about that, and building empathy inside that relationship. So that's a little bit about me. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and I have lived here for just over 1.5 years. I'm new to this city, and I'm really grateful to the community that Amplify has sort of opened up for me living here. So that's who I am. Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. This is such a cool conversation, and I'm excited as well, Lee and Ashley. I am Sarah Rowe. I'm a multimedia artist living and working in Omaha. I've collaborated with Amplify many times over the years. So it's always a wonderful dynamic conversation. And I can't wait to hear people's questions at the end too. Yeah, my work spans a lot of different mediums. It's always community-based. I try to make some sort of participatory elements in my work. I'm a painter, printmaker, but I also do like performance and ritual and immersive experiences for my audience. I love storytelling, shared storytelling, play, healing as a visual artist. I'm a mother and definitely an animal lover. I don't know, I guess that's me in a nutshell. I don't know if we can pass it over to you, Ashley.
Sure can, yeah.
Okay.
You guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am unpacking my horse, speaking of co-creating with animals as we speak. I was a reporter. I don't know if you can hear my Mustang in the background. He's all excited I'm home. I was a reporter for NPR for years, covering science, the environment, and natural resources from the city. And Seattle, I was based in Seattle for 7 years. And then, frankly, kind of just got tired of the grind of parachuting into a lot of rural communities where a lot of these natural resource decisions have direct implications for people who live there. And so my husband and I decided to leave Seattle 4 years ago, and we live on 40 acres of sagebrush in the reddest county, most conservative county in Washington state now. And I have to say, it's been one of the best things for my art and for my work. And it's expanded the way I look at stories. And it's also been a really powerful way to have animals in my life in a meaningful way. And in fact, I don't think so I have 2 horses. I have a mare named Pistol, and who a lady gave to me for free when I moved to the Valley, which is just like a free puppy, not a free beer, for anybody who's wondering. Like, oh, free horse sounds like a great idea. What could go wrong? No, she's great, but she's definitely a green broke. And then I adopted a Mustang from the Bureau of Land Management. The federal government will give you a wild horse for $125 in this country, which feels like a pretty great birthright for all of us to have. And these horses have given me access to a community of ranchers and backcountry packers and hunters, and a way of being with animals that is so fundamentally different and has actually been really inspiring. It's uncomfortable sometimes, and I welcome questions about that, but I was out gathering cows off of public land all day today with Pistol, and I've gotten to know some of those 4th, 5th generation ranchers that a lot of folks love to hate. I think in the more urban environs where I used to live even. So I don't know, it's been a real shift. And I really, when Lee got in touch about the concept for this panel, I was like, oh, hell yeah, it's such a great idea. And I think it's something that I sort of think about every day and have a lot of thoughts to share, especially about the journey I'm on now with this baby Mustang. He's actually hugging me right now. He comes over and he just kind of puts his head on my shoulder and just visits. And it's one of the, like, I can feel my heart rate drop whenever he does it. It's like the happiest thing. So I'll stop there and let Lee take it away.
Thank you both so much for those introductions. It's beautiful. I'd love to sort of ask, just to start with, like, leading off of Ashley's description of sort of this hug that's happening with this horse, like how do you feel like the influence of animals impacts your creative work? Like, what are the things that, because for me, it really is a body to body relationship. Like, I've been thinking about that so much with the bones that I've been collecting. And Ashley and I were actually just at a residency together in Oregon. And one of the things I was doing there was collecting a wider range of animals than I've ever had access to. So I have coyotes and deer and sheep, and the bones of animals that I haven't had before. And the similarity, the armature that makes up all living things feels like such an important part of it to me. And I wondered if there was, I don't know, just if there was anything that resonated with either of you about this idea of like true sort of body to body contact that we have with animals.
I'd love to jump in, having gotten to watch Lee work firsthand with her bones. It really was, you know, spending that week together on the ranch. I would just visit with her, and it was like a sacrament. I mean, the kind of reverence and care that you showed to cast-offs, you know, animals that we don't value, we don't cherish, we don't mourn, we just kind of slay with our vehicles every day. I think that there was such power and reverence and humility in the way that you would spend hours polishing those bones until I know your hands were cramping. And I don't know, I'll never see roadkill the same way again. And, you know, even driving around, when I see shards of tires, Lee was gathering shards of rubber tires on the side of the road as well for another part of her installation. And I was like, gosh, I should grab that for Lee. I bet she'd want that chunk of rubber. But I'll say, I was actually talking with a girlfriend today who I was riding with all day looking for cows. And I was like, when you're with your horse, she has a Mustang too, which I think are different. I kind of think of Mustangs like old souls, because they live in the wild for at least a couple years before they come into our world. And so they've kind of figured out their own path before they're forced to kind of walk ours. And I think that there's a similar reverence that I have for my Mustang, that like he didn't choose to be here with me, but hopefully we can find some semblance of freedom together. If I can learn from him and try to walk his path with him and be respectful that it's not just about cowboying. It's not just about, you know, a lot of the folks I hang out with, it's just get her done and train him, break him, you know, make him do what you need him to do. He's going to be a good little cow pony one of these days. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if that's what his path is going to be. I hope he wants to do that with me. They probably all think I'm a big freaking hippie, but I don't really care, because I know that when I spend time with this horse, like he chose to trust me. And there was a very distinct moment where he was in a pen hiding on the other side and wanted nothing to do with me. And then one day he came over and he put his nose out and I put my hand out and we touched. And if you ask anybody who has Mustangs, there is that moment where they choose to walk into your world. And most of them don't get that option. They get forced to do it, you know? But it was really important to me that it was as much of a choice for him as possible. And I think as I build a relationship with this horse, there'll be times where I'll I'll just come out and hang out with him. And it's almost like we're vibrating at the same frequency. It's so hard to describe, but I don't know if anybody who has a dog, you know, when you just have one of those days and you get down on the floor with your dog and you just love on it and you forget about everything else that's going on in your world and what you're thinking about or what you're stressing about, and you just focus on like massaging your dog's jaw or something, you know. I can't explain it any other way, but like those simple moments where we kind of like forget about our otherness. I've never felt them so profoundly until I was working with this young Mustang. I'll stop there.
Yeah. Sarah.
And he's a muse. I'm now making a podcast about Mustangs and a kid's book about Mustangs. So he's definitely, in terms of my creative process, he is fuel for that process. And that connection has inspired me to make some cool stuff, hopefully in the next year.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That connection is everything. It's why we're here. And certainly the native person in me has very deep resonance or reverence for all creatures. And when I pass by even the tiniest roadkill, I can feel my heart shatter a little bit. And I say prayers for animals. And if I can move something off of a path or off the road, I will like put it in a more respectful place. It's not always possible, but now Lee is like really raising the bar in that way. Now I'm like, oh geez. Yeah, what you do for these animals is so incredibly important, to honor their lives and their passing, to help them pass on. Like I was brought up to see animals as our kin, so they are our literal relatives, and I feel like that the way we speak about animals and plants very deeply affects our relationships to each other, to the earth, to how we live our lives, you know? So that kinship is very sacred, and working with horses has been really healing for me. I'm a city girl. I hope I can end up on a ranch someday. But I feel like I've painted horses into my life, literally. Like I've had friends that had ranches, and I've always lived in the city, and I've never owned property, and raising a child by myself. So it's like, how am I going to get horses? So I would just kind of live vicariously through my friends that had horses. And I wanted to step up and really work more hands-on. And I've worked in a lot of clinical settings, like doing healing arts. And now I've learned more about the equine therapeutic riding, which I've introduced my 17-year-old to now, which is really exciting. She's into horses now. So yeah, shifting from this kind of office clinical setting into a barn setting has been really exciting and kind of a new thing for me, and has really helped me heal from some rough patches in my life more than any sort of therapy ever has. And it's interesting painting these horses. I have to say, like, I love that we've mentioned deer and horses, because deer is like a symbol of gentleness in a native totem. So I would paint deer as a symbol of gentleness. And then in my last show, where I did a few large paintings, one of the titles for one of my pieces, it's 4 horse heads for the 4 directions. And the title of it was Gentleness is a Strength. And I feel like it's the most important strength. And when a beast that big trusts in you and you give it that space and respect, like, that gentleness is more powerful than anything, more powerful than any violence. Like, it's the most healing force when you have that connection, especially with another species. To have that trust is incredible. So I'll stop there. I could go on and on. But
I just wrote this down. Gentleness more powerful than violence. That is such a beautiful thing. Yeah. Oh.
Well, and I think what I love about working with Boo, well, his name is Bua'a, which actually means friend in Paiute. The chairwoman of the Burns Paiute tribe shared that word with me as when I asked her for help with naming him. And they make us better. It's not just that I can't, if I walk into the round pen to try to work with him and I'm brooding or impatient or angry, it's a non-starter. Like, it's not really, like, when you say gentleness, that's exactly what's required if you're going to ask for anything. It's a form of reverence to me that is the only way to make progress together, is to come kind of with your hat in your hand a little bit, which I think runs directly contrary to patriarchal dominance approaches to nature and how we control it. And it is meant to serve us and provide us with what we need, as opposed to being reciprocal. I think that was never as real to me until I lived rural and saw that firsthand on my property, but more importantly in my relationship with this horse in particular. I'll stop.
Yeah. Sarah, do you have any follow-ups to that thinking, that line of?
Well, I think it's the most powerful thing that animals teach us. And when we really listen and approach an animal with humility and respect their power, like, there's no greater lesson, because they are the voiceless creatures, and it's our highest calling to be stewards of that. So I love that, like, and it does click, like, and just, yeah, I'm taking English writing lessons because I love the challenge of it. Like, every tedious little movement of your heels, like, you are as one with this horse, like, I wanted to learn those very tedious things. And to know that a horse can sense where you're looking, or if you're leading with your core, like, it's just mind blowing. They're so much more in tune than we are. And when you connect in that way, it kind of readjusts your internal compass on this land that we're really disconnected from just because of what we've done to the land. And we need their help reshaping the land and restoring ecosystems. It's just, it runs so deep, from just a very casual, like, hello, how beautiful that can be, to like, you're literally shaping the land that we need to exist on.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that sense of presence that happens in the natural world. But even the ranch that that Ashley and I were on, there were so many deer there all the time, in the passage. And I walking between the studio and the house, it was incredibly dark. It was a moonless night one night, and I was coming back at about 2 a.m. from the studio, just walking, and there was this huge breath I could feel in the path, and it was a mule deer that was in the path, and it just stood up and came towards me, and I couldn't see it, but I could hear it breathing, and it was just this. There's a presence that happens in an embodied presence with wildness that I feel like is unlike anything else. And, I don't know, I was immediately untired, immediately when you are in your body in that way. It's such a beautiful thing. And I don't have experience riding like either of you, but I'm interested in what that means for interspecies communication, to be able to we as humans have so much weight on words as a way to dialogue, and I'm so interested in that, what it is to communicate through the body to another species' bodies. Yeah. Oh. Well, one of the next questions in the discussion was this idea of sort of what importance do the small, repetitive, tedious, imperceptual, and unnoticed acts of co-becoming hold, like these ideas of coming together with animals. You've both talked really beautifully about the repetitive act of that, and I'm curious in particular with Sarah, with the ritual and the repeated elements of that. But how does that resonate with your work, and sort of with an idea of, I don't know, progress, but I'm really curious about how that resonates with your work, this idea of repetition.
Mm-hmm. Well, rituals just are inherently important because it's something that you do with intention. And I don't think it needs to be anything elaborate. It probably shouldn't be. If it's just all for show and it's taking up a bunch of time, then why are you doing it? I think it's important to revisit what rituals we do and why we're doing them, so they don't lose their meaning. Because sacredness is very simple. And like, I'm sitting right now next to 2 nano fish tanks because I can't have animals in this place that I rent with my daughter, but you need animals to feel like home, So I got her some fish tanks, and I was hoping that this betta fish would coexist with the snail to help eat the algae, and the fish is just a little baby samurai, and he's like catapulting this poor little snail off of his perch. So I had to buy a whole new tank for a snail. And then I felt bad that snail didn't have a buddy. So we went from 1 fish to 2 tanks for these little tiny creatures. And honestly, like, feeding them twice a day is one of the joys of my day. These 2 beautiful little ecosystems that live in my dining room, it can be as simple as that, So I love the spectrum of it, like down from the micro to the macro, it's like, yeah, and that shows up a lot in my work, like the earth and cosmos, and so working with these tiny snails and then going and working with a herd of horses and like cleaning their stalls, you know, it's like the most wonderful act of service, and everything does fall away, and the stress of your life, you know, when you're caring for a creature in that way. And I hope that that's reflected in my more traditional like artworks. I try to really use the space on a canvas to honor that connection, that cosmic connection we have with animals, you know, and the bodies that we're in.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Peter, I mean, seeing that Ashley is here and is online, is it possible to enable her video? I don't know if Peter is still hosting. Ashley, I can't help, unfortunately, because I'm not in control. Oh, maybe we can ask here.
Can you hear me though now on the? Okay, great. So I'm gonna hang up there.
Okay, yep,
And then if the
Great.
video works, great. And if it doesn't, I'll just join audio.
okay, yeah. Do you have any thoughts in that vein, Ashley?
I think in terms of the service component, I really appreciate what you were saying about that, Sarah. I think that my days are better because they start in service to my animals. And when I lived in the city, my days started in service to myself. You know, it was when do I get my coffee and my clothes picked out and my commute started, and you know, is everything in my purse and what is my lunch and what is my, you know, everything was just about me. And I feed my horses by pretty much 8:30 every morning, and it is it's a really important yay, hi. Hey everyone. Yeah, literally just like ran into my house and grabbed a quarter, so cheers. So yeah, that reverence of, you know, I was raised Christian. I am still Christian. I don't go to church all the time because I do feel like I get there's a sacrament to it. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like they come first. And even today I was late for this panel, but first my horse gets fed, first she gets watered, first she gets untacked, and then whatever else I need happens. And that's the only order of operations for any cowboy, even if you ask some of the most conservative, you know, beat the crap out of their horses, but they eat before the cowboy eats at the end of a long day. And I have a lot of respect for that care of creature. And I think it'd be interesting to unpack, and I'm constantly sort of wrestling with the why behind that, which is people, you know, when you make a living moving cows or ranching, your animals are also your tools. You know, there's some of the country that we ride in where you couldn't get an ATV, you couldn't gather your cows in except on foot. There's no other way to get up there to really get them out of some of this high country where I was riding today. And so there is a very slippery slope between seeing an animal as a revered creature and seeing an animal as a glorified ATV that you need to do your job. And so I think that's been a little bit hard for me to walk that line and feel like sometimes, you know, I don't beat my horse if she doesn't do what I want her to do. You know, but I'm around that, and it becomes, I try to be respectful of different cultures and different backgrounds and understand that they grew up very differently from the way I did around animals. I grew up riding English, Sarah. And so, you know, very much like, yeah, it's just a different approach, I think, that has been hard sometimes, I would say. But in turn, I have a lot of reverence for it because I see how necessary the animals are to do what folks do on the land out here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think for me, so much of making sculpture, and I loved hearing Sarah talk about the space of the canvas, but also the space of the fish tank and the space of the stable. Like there's the spaces, right, that we are engaged. And because I work in installation so much, and because I work with sculpture, so much of what I'm doing is trying to build relationship between me and an object, you know, and having that object be the bones of an animal is just, it's not just an object, you know, but it is a physical weight too. And it is me carrying a body out of a canyon, or it is me carrying a body out of a ditch. And that relationship of moving one thing, one being, one body from one place to another is strangely what I do as an artist. Like, it's not so much inspiration as it is like physical action of moving one thing to another. Yeah. It's sort of,
Lee, how did you get interested in, I mean, what drew you to roadkill originally, and that ritual like you were talking about? I mean, what made you want to climb into ditches and carry out dead things?
I mean, it's so funny. I was going back through a bunch of old family photographs, and there's a photo of me at like 13 that my family had driven to New Mexico, and we were camping, but we'd stopped to see George O'Keeffe's ranch, and I just stayed in the ditch because there was a cow skeleton in the ditch, and I was like, you have to stop the car, I have to get out and draw this. And my family went on and like saw the ranch and like toured the thing, and I just stayed in the ditch and drew the cow skeletons. Like, so I've been collecting bones my whole life. But it really was, I took a class in bone and steel tool making from this woman, Shauna Leno, who makes incredible bookbinding tools with bone and steel, which is what so many tools used to be made with this material. You know, the buttons on our clothes, the needles that we sew things together with, all the boning in our corsets, you know, all of that was animal material. So I started working with it, and it's just the most beautiful. Like, polished bone is more beautiful than anything. Like, I challenge anyone who works with plastic to pretend that it's ever as beautiful as bone. And I don't know, I got sort of obsessed, but I also started finding them a lot. Like, once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. I was running a lot in rural Iowa, and I would pass the same deer every day on my long runs. And I couldn't, it sort of hit a moment where I couldn't just let it lie there anymore. You know, I couldn't unsee it. Yeah.
And now you're helping so many other people see them, which is really a beautiful thing.
I think that's what art does. That's what story does, is it opens up that space for us to, I don't know. I loved hearing Sarah say that you painted horses into your life. Like, I think that happens with creative work, that something starts and you can't let it, I don't know, you have to follow it.
Yeah,
Totally.
I think our actions. Yeah, I loved, Ashley, what you said about your faith, and I think that the way we move and the actions we take are prayer and action, and maybe that's why you feel that way with your horses. Like, it is literally prayer and action, because there's no greater thing than actually doing something. You know, like, it's important to pray and put good thoughts and energy out, but when you're actually using your body in that way, like I was just watching something yesterday on PBS, and they were talking about, you know, these cultures that have somehow remained intact in today's world, where they exhaust their physical bodies and they work with the land, they work with animals, they work as a community, and there's no word for insomnia in their language. Like they created
awesome.
these sicknesses because we're not using our bodies. Like, I guarantee most of us aren't mentally ill, we're just not using our bodies in the way that we should, that nature intended.
Yeah, so true.
Oh, yes.
And I think, you know, we all work in different mediums. I work with sound, and I find myself, you know, I recorded the moment when I first touched Boo, and it was just on my iPhone, like a voice memo app, you know, crappy audio probably, but having those little sketches from those moments, they're audio sketches is really what they are. And I'm really wrestling with, I'm making a podcast series that explores the larger issue of Mustangs in the American West and how we manage them, or frankly, aren't managing them effectively as a country. And using Boo's story to tell that larger story and explore those larger questions, it feels like a very convoluted and complicated issue, but I hope that like Lee's done by making people see roadkill in a way that they never have. We don't value it as a society. We don't show reverence to it as a society. That maybe those audio snapshots of this horse on this individual horse on this individual journey into our world can help more people want to see his world or want to understand what's going on with, you know, tens of thousands of too many wild horses across the West on public lands, and what that means for all of us who care about public lands and what should be done about them. But I've never, it's funny, and Lee and I talked about this when I was at the artist residency. I've never really thought of myself as an artist. I've always been a journalist. You know, we deal in facts and we deal in information and truth. And post-Trump, it feels like, what does that even mean anymore? For every set of facts I can present to my climate denier neighbors, they have a set of facts from their sources that they feel are equally valid. And it's very disheartening as a journalist to kind of live in that world. But I think where I found solace is more moving toward art and more moving toward the emotional realm that can come from good storytelling and human personal experience. And I think that when I look at my community and where I am right now, I've made my friends through horses, like through having a horse that I could go and tag along with ranchers and learn, like see their world through their eyes and form those connections. I think the animals were the connective tissue when I think about it. And I just having the door open or creating the space for those kinds of conversations has helped me realize that using my horses as my muse, but also as a medium a little bit, or as a way to connect, has opened doors for me to start telling stories that might actually change more minds than any amount of facts or figures or things I would have put on NPR when I was, you know, filing my stories by 4 p.m. every day for all things considered. You know, that was what I did for a paycheck. But I think when my heart, I wasn't getting what I needed in my heart. And I think that's where, like, moving toward the power of story, and for you folks, the power of art to really connect people to some deeper truths that then any facts we might trot out to support our personal beliefs that already exist, you know?
Yeah.
My last series was about regenerative ranching. So I traveled all over the West and interviewed women ranchers. It's called Women's Work. If you're looking for a podcast, there's 8 episodes, and it's basically about, I wanted to showcase women ranchers who are changing the way we raise beef in this country, or livestock in this country. Because there are a lot of good news stories that don't get told. And perhaps no surprise to present company, women seem to be leading the charge on many of those new practices, or frankly, sometimes very old, more sustainable practices. And I think that came from a place of like, is this hard-hitting journalism? No. Is it more on the artsy fartsy side of like public radio? Yeah, it's kind of old school. It's documentary, it's immersive audio, it's hanging out on a ranch for 4 or 5 days and just rolling tape, just coming home with hours of tape and trying to, like Leish comes home with thousands of bones and tries to piece it together into something that tells a larger story or shows us a truth that maybe we couldn't have seen if we hadn't just immersed ourselves in those minute details. That I think a lot of journalists, myself included in my previous, you know, job, like you didn't have the time to go and do that and really just sit with it and sit with someone else's experience of something in a way that might actually change another person's perspective on something, i.e. in this instance, cows and how we raise them.
Yeah. I'd love to hear too, Sarah, the part of your practice that involves storytelling, but also performance. Like, I'm so interested in what performance does too for presence. Like, I feel like that like performance, you have to be there. Like the artist is present, but also the audience is like, we are in this together for this time in a way that feels really specific and feels like it relates to some of the things that you both have been talking about with relationship to horses, but and what that does for be here now. Yeah.
I think just creating a space that requires presence and reflection is more important than I don't want a passive like experience in any space, because I am forced to work in traditional gallery settings a lot, but that's not the only setting I work in. But I can always transform that space into something else. I can shift not just the space, but the energy of it. And it's always a challenge. It's a good challenge. And I try not to put myself as the center. Like, it's not human centric. It's not my story centered. It's just a way to create kind of a haven for people in a space that I hope feels open and safe for shared storytelling. Yeah, it's not like, it's very loose performance when I'm creating those spaces. And a lot of times it requires the physical engagement of the people in the room to help me transform the space, and it becomes something bigger, and you can see marks that are not mine, and I like, you can come in later and be like, you can tell that something happened there. And it really charges the space, I think. And I want to leave a mark, and inspire people, because we are all artists and storytellers. Like, we just have to find our medium. It doesn't matter what it is. So yeah, I like working in more non-traditional settings because of that, because I'm not trying to be in an art bubble by any means, but it's just the way that I communicate best.
Yeah. No, art is that. I mean, I love that both of you have talked about medium and medium as a material. I think we think of it as a material, but I'm thinking about medium as a conduit also. That, that the medium of storytelling, the medium of painting, the medium of performance as a connective tissue, both in a human community, but also between us and the animal world. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
I like the double meaning of that word. It's good.
Yeah, yeah. I love that about language.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess, are there places that that you feel like are opening up for you with, I mean, I know Ashley's working on this book, this children's book, which I can't wait to see. But are there places with your, and I know Sarah has two huge projects happening right now in Omaha. Like, what are the places that animals are guiding your work, your upcoming projects?
Man, I've been so lucky over COVID. Like, it almost killed me. I almost died in the COVID unit. But the pandemic has been one of the biggest gifts for me as an artist, because I had to stop teaching and giving myself to a million corners of the community. And I was forced to be home with my daughter and move my studio home and really focus on and channel what it is that I do, instead of just like, blah, like giving in every direction, which I loved, but I was getting really burnt out, and that nothing would have stopped me from doing that, because it was a way for me to know that I could keep a roof over my daughter's head without being like, okay, I'm going to give all this up and just trust in my process and hope that we don't end up under a bridge, but I was forced into it. And yeah, so I've had a lot of really cool opportunities because I wasn't running all over town and schlepping things around in my car. So I directed my first film with a woman on the Omaha reservation who has built this acres huge community garden with the school, and the school on the reservation, they have their own farm stand. Like, it's just the most magical place. I think anyone that's near Omaha, just go support their farm stand. You're getting the best organic fruits and vegetables and supporting actual important education. Like, these kids are learning the most important things you can learn. and there's a bison herd there. I think it's very important to talk about bison. My tribe, we don't have a reservation. I'm Ponca, but we have 2 small herds, and restoring the prairie is so important. It's as important as the ocean and the jungle and the mountains. Like, we need to restore the prairie. And sadly, as much as I adore cows, they are an invasive species. And when you reintroduce bison, it does help to restore the prairie and the ecosystem and the soil. And we're in a dire situation, as we all know, with soil and water. I don't care what anyone says about the climate. Like, you can see the way that plants are growing in size and the way they don't grow, or the way they rot, or whatever, like, because of the soil and lack of rain and yeah, groundwater, all that stuff. So I loved interviewing this woman. I don't want to like put her on the spot, but I'll make a blurb about this conversation I had, because this film is still being made. I don't even know if I'm allowed to talk about it. Sorry. I don't know too much, but but there are beautiful things happening within Indigenous communities, and it's really important for us to seek out that knowledge, because our kinship with land and animals, like, that's our future, you know. And so these programs are happening, and the bison are returning, and it's those things that are the glimmer of hope.
Yes.
Yeah, I would something really exciting. I'm researching this new series now about Mustangs, and I've long been a huge fan of Indian Relay. I just think it's like so badass. If you ever want to like go down YouTube rabbit holes to start watching Indian Relay, and it's for those who don't know, maybe Sarah, you should explain it better than I probably. Are the Honka, are they they're horse people, of course, if they're bison people, but is Indian Relay a big part of your the culture?
I'm not connected to that.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot I don't know also. Yeah, that sounds good
I
to me.
hadn't hadn't heard about it until I moved, over the Cascades, from Seattle. A lot of the coastal tribes are not horse people, of course, in Washington state. But once you get out here, the Colville Reservation is about an hour and a half east of me. And there are many horse people there, and the kids learn how to there are these relay races where they race horses around the track, and they jump off, they ride bareback, and they paint the horses beautifully, and they race relays, and you have to jump off. The horses come in at a gallop, the rider jumps off and jumps on the next horse and continues around for another lap and tries to, whoever wins gets the fastest. And OMAC Express is the team on the Colville Res that just won in South Dakota, basically won like the nationals of Indian Relay. And I got in touch again. This is where horses just weirdly connect me to people that I never would have met. And the story is, there was a horrible wildfire, speaking of climate change happening every single day here. And it was 2 years ago. And I brought a bunch of hay over. I hauled hay over to the county fairgrounds, where folks over by the res were getting donated hay to help feed their livestock, because their pastures had all burned. And I met this woman, Naomi, and she is a Colville member. And I became friends with her on Facebook, and turns out her brother's really big into Indian Relay. And I was like, are Mustangs? I knew there were Mustangs on the Colville Reservation. And I was like, is that part of like Indian Relay? And she's like, oh yeah, our kids go out and catch the wild horses, and they learn how to do relay on these wild ponies that they just break themselves and rip tear around like the prop, wherever they are, to learn how to ride. I was like, it was so cool, because I never would have met her if I hadn't been connected to the horse and ranching community in the valley where I live, to be able to go over and even show up and try to help after a tragedy like the wildfire over there. And I don't know, it's just the ways that animals connect us. And I'm so excited to showcase Indian Relay in this podcast series as a way to celebrate Mustangs, but also it's it sounds like a real revival of Indigenous pride, to watch how, especially the Colville, talk about like, this is like your hometown football team going to nationals, basically coming home, and the parties they had on the res to welcome them back, and the horses are heroes and the riders are heroes and they're local celebrities. And I'm really excited to show a wider audience about that like a good news story, you know, from Indian country. And I think it centers around the horses, the animals, and the connections that these kids have with these wild ponies. So yeah, I don't know, you just got me thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yes to the bison. I agree with you 100% on that. And cows are definitely an invasive species. And I think, again, it's hard to watch how cows are treated too, when we talk about like being with animals and being one with animals, you know, the kind of stuff that I see happening to these, like the way that cowboys treat it turns my stomach, you know. But I also will say that in the time that I've lived in the valley where I live, more of them are switching over to grass-fed, grass-finished, instead of sending them to the feedlot, which is a horrifying place for an animal to spend the last part of its life. And so I don't know, you start to see these little changes in the good old boy network when they start to hear things like, I don't know, podcasts about women ranchers, or they ride with hippies like me who are like, I'm going to tell my horse she's a good girl whenever she does anything. And I don't care if you make fun of me because she's a good girl.
The matriarchy, we're coming.
We're coming.
Balance. Yep.
Damn straight. Well, and honestly, you learn pretty quickly in any ranching community. It's like you go to the wives if you want to get anything done. Like they're the ones that are actually, just like in a herd, the mares are calling the shots. The stallions are the loud ones that everyone listens to, but the mares are actually the ones making the decisions, you know?
I love that. Oh, well, we just have a few minutes left. Peter, do you want to open it up to questions?
Yeah, absolutely. The Q&A is open. If anybody has questions, please feel free.
Maybe not. Maybe we've solved it all.
Got it all figured out.
Got it all figured out. Yeah,
I have a quick question, if that's okay.
please.
What kind of advice would you all give to somebody who's coming into their own sort of awareness of what co-becoming means in relation to animals, being with animals?
Well, for me, it started with rescuing animals as a child, you know. I grew up in a family that rescued all kinds of different pets, and my daughter and I have rescued many rats over the years, and that really helped her to learn how to care for another being and to see beyond these kind of creatures that are looked at as vermin, but they're so intelligent and clean and sweet and loving. You know, I think especially starting with smaller animals and children, you know, however we can engage in that way is ideal, like to start kids young, to, you know, foster generations of humans that care for animals of all species. But yeah, I'd say just if you're curious about a certain animal, like just see how you can volunteer to help or connect in whatever way or whatever capacity you can, even if it's just here and there. And it'll just blossom from there, I would assume.
Yeah. I would really second that. And I feel like also just being outside. Like, I think people are not outside enough. I loved what Sarah was saying about there being no word for insomnia. Like, I feel like having your body outside in the world, and having your feet off asphalt also really helps build connection to the animal world. And that sounds super basic, but I feel like I've learned so much about deer and about the way that they move in the landscape by walking in the Platte River, by walking in creek beds, by walking along verges, by, you know, like being in the spaces that animals are in with my body. One shows me how incredibly tough they are. Like, man, the undergrowth in a Midwestern forest is really prickly and really hard to move through. And to think that animals just move through, you know, there's ways to find ways through the landscape. And I'm really interested in that. I'm also interested in what happens when we listen in a landscape. And I think animals teach us how to do that. Anyone who's ever scared a turkey out of a prairie knows that when you're suddenly confronted with a flying bowling ball, you know, it's it's a real shift.
Yeah, I would say, I think for me, when I lived in the city, I would go for walks, like I would walk the dog or I would go for a run. But it was very structured time. And I think the other thing that I would add to what Lee's saying is, yes, we all need to be outside more, but I think we also need to ramble more outside. And I think that's one thing a horse really helps you do is, like, sometimes I just drop the reins and we'll see where Pistol takes me. And sometimes it's back to the trailer when she's feeling lazy, but like sometimes it's just, especially after dark, if I'm out riding, she finds her way home, and there's a real, but that ability to have not a purpose or an end in mind when you're interacting with nature, to just do that real close observation and unstructured interaction with it, I think is, and you can do that in a city. I firmly believe you can do that in a city too. I think I just didn't learn to do it until I was lost, frankly, in the sagebrush, and had to kind of figure things out and see where I was and rely on my horse to help me do that. We call it the mare mosey, Pistol's mosey. She walks really slowly, and I was like, I could just kick her the whole time and try to make her go faster, or I could freaking slow down, because there's a lot, turns out, I needed to learn from my horse. So it's that unstructured, unhurried time that's been really important to me. And then the other thing I would add in terms of finding that connection is it's what we eat. And I know I don't want to be preachy about it, because I'm certainly not. When I'm on the road, I eat whatever I can get my hands on. You know, it's hard, but I think that, you know, I buy a share of beef from a rancher now in my community, and I know exactly how that cow lived its life. And I know that it had one bad day, and otherwise it was, you know, grass fed. And that's where I'm not finding a union with that animal. I won't ascribe any loftier things to that, except that I am voting with my dollars about how I want animals to be treated in my world. And I don't know, I feel like that's another side of that coin of finding that oneness, whether it's with a rat, which I think is really cool, or with like what you're putting in your body and what you're spending, what kind of economy we're voting for animals, if we are going to eat animals.
I agree. Like, I call myself a vegetarian because that's how much of an animal lover I am. But if I'm in a place where I know an animal has been cared for and has lived the most natural life possible and respected, you know, or if there's bison from the res, it's, you know, they harvest it once a year. I'm like, that's a gift. And, you know, that animal was respected. So, you know, I wouldn't get preachy about it either, but yeah, voting with your dollar is the best way that we can vote, because it's the easiest way to create the world we want to live in, like by who we are supporting directly in our daily lives. And animals will directly benefit from that, of course.
We do have one question in the Q&A that maybe we can wrap up with. Someone asks, are there any authors, writers, artists, thinkers whose work have influenced your understanding of co-becoming? Looking for any recommendations of additional resources any of you would like to share.
Well, I always have to say Braiding Sweetgrass.
I know.
Because it's about the kinship. I mean, but I think most of us have read that at this point. But I feel like that's a must read for everyone, because it's like science, poetry, storytelling. It's practical. It's beautiful. That's my number one, I think, for this moment.
Yeah. And listening to it on tape, she recorded it, and it's really, as an audio person, like, I just love hearing her voice reading her words. It's so beautiful.
Any of Kimmerer's podcasts, yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
forever and ever. Yeah. And I loved Gathering Moss too. I mean, I felt like that was really amazing. Also, in thinking about scale, that really was working on a project inside a tree while I was listening to that. And it was really pretty amazing standing inside a sycamore, thinking about the scale of moss on the earth. But animal work, yeah, I feel like I don't know. I promise I will put together a list. I feel really sad that I don't have like a perfect, I don't know. I've been listening to Mary Roach's Animal Crimes lately, which is about places where humans and animals collide. But I like her a lot as a writer too.
Yeah, like, I have to think about it. I can't think of, yeah, that really centers that co-becoming. It's kind of the oldest idea, but also really strangely cutting edge in our present day.
Yeah.
I think when you look at a lot of the natural horsemanship stuff that I'm reading in training a Mustang, like better horsemanship through feel. It's not like a novel. It's to learn how to train a horse. But I really think that it is about co-becoming with the horse. It is about figuring out how to do stuff together and as a team instead of as a dominant structure. But that's probably not appealing to most readers, I wouldn't say, who aren't training a horse.
Yeah, I've ordered like the horsemanship books and like technical writing manuals and stuff like that. It's like reading a science book in a way.
Yeah.
Derek Jensen's book of Coyotes and Conversations was really important to me. It came out probably 20 years ago, but it's really brilliant, and it's all about interspecies communication. And that was formative for me. Yeah. Oh, I can't hear you.
Those are all really great recommendations. Thank you for sharing those. And
Donna Haraway. Yeah.
Donna Haraway is another good one. Yep. Species Meet is a good sort of assessment of relationality and what co-becoming can mean between species. But yeah, those are all really great recommendations. And thank you all so much for sharing in this conversation with us. I feel like it was a really rich discussion, and we're super thankful to all of you for dedicating time and energy to it. So with that, I think we'll sign off unless anybody has kind of final thoughts or anything else they'd like to share.
Temple Grandin. Sorry.
For sure. Good one.
Yeah, both thinking in pictures and animals in conversation. Yeah, she's pretty amazing. Okay.
All right.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Lee, well done. And nice to meet you, Sarah.
So great to meet you, Sarah.
Likewise, this is great. Hopefully we get to have more conversations, and hopefully we can all go out and work with animals together at some point.
The best.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Well done.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody,
Bye.
for coming. Have a good night.